Hello everyone, welcome to today's class. So we are going to be talking about local storage and persistence in Flutter. So in our previous section, in our previous class, we talked about, okay, let me turn this on, right? All right, so in our previous class, we talked about APIs and HTTP requests. And so if you have any questions, just compile all your questions, right? If you have questions in the previous classes and also in this class, if there's any question, let me know in the comment section, and also uh, compile all of them. If you cannot drop it on the comment section, compile all of them, and we'll be having a live section on Saturday on our Telegram channel. So make sure you bring those questions there. I'm going to answer all of them, right? We are going to have a Q&A section. And also, if you're just joining us for the first time, I'll be dropping the link to the Telegram community, right, on the description of this video. And also, if you are just joining us, to make sure you go back and watch the previous videos, because that will give you a better understanding of what we are trying to achieve, okay? So today we'll explore how to store and retrieve data locally in our Flutter application. And unlike APIs, which fetch data from the internet, local storage allow apps to store data directly on the device, right, ensuring offline access. So today we have some agendas that we'll be looking at. So first thing, we're going to talk about using shared preferences. Shared preferences is one is a library that is available in Flutter that we can use to store data locally. So it's used for storing small user data like settings, preferences. Let's say, for example, we have things uh, like user settings, dark mode to turn it on and off. We can use shared preference for that. I'm going to talk about it later. And also, if you're working on, let's say, authentication, you want to store the user authentication status. You're also going to use shared preference for that purpose. Then later on, I'll be talking about SQLite and Hive. So just give you a brief introduction to SQLite and Hive. But in this class, we are not going to dig deep into Hive, right? I'll just talk about SQLite, talk a little bit about Hive. So your assignment will be to go and practice Hive, take a look at it. So basically, Hive and SQLite, they are used for storing data too, just like shared preference. But SQLite is used for managing structured data, right? Why for Hive is used to manage unstructured local data, all right? So I'm also going to talk about when you need to use each storage options, the best practice for selecting storage solutions. Then finally, we're going to build a simple to-do or a simple note-taking app that saves and load notes locally. And I'm also going to add a toggle somewhere that we can switch the theme from dark mode to light mode. And we are going to be saving the state of that theme using shared preference. All right, guys, let's get started with this. So let me just, all right, this was the last class API. So, all right, so here now we have our screen. Okay, so nothing much is happening here. Just our previous classes and everything that we have achieved so far. So just as I said, this class will be about creating a note-taking application, right? In doing that, you're going to learn how to use shared preference and SQLite to give you a better understanding. So first thing I want to do is to create a new screen that we can route to. Like, I think we already have one screen around for to do, right? This one's for to do. So I'm just going to copy this to do screen, right? Duplicate it, then I'll use it for the note taking. So we can just add note taking. But before I do that, let me show you guys an example of what we accomplished in the last class, where we use lists, right, to store the user data. If you notice here, if I type something and save it, it saves it to the list, right? But now if I do a hot restart, or let's say user has closed the app and return back, what happens? Everything refresh. The data that we stored initially refreshes. So to be able to solve this kind of problem, we need to introduce local database, shared preference, SQLite or Hive, right, to persist user data. All right, so let's get started with this. So first thing, I'm going to create a new screen, and I will call this note taking. Let's just say note screen, like so. So I already have the scrollable screen, which is handling this to-do app. So what I'm going to do, I'll just copy the whole stuff that we have inside and go back to our note screen, paste it here. So we have note screen, all right, like so. But right now we can now route to the screen. So what I'm going to do is just to go to my main.dat, just here. I'm going to add another button that will take us to that screen. And I will call this note screen, or let's just say note app. Okay. And right, let me add some spacing below this. All right, now you can see we are getting this overflow error. That's because this screen is no more responsive, and the number of data here, some of them are hiding, so it's not scrollable. That's why it's hiding and it's breaking our UI. So in order to make this screen responsive and also to make it scrollable so that we can see the hidden items, what I will do here is to wrap the parent widget, which is the column. I'm going to wrap it with single child school view. So I already talked about this in our previous classes. So make sure you watch those videos, right? All right, so right now I will go back to our notes app. So I'll point to our notes screen and change this to notes app and save it. So now I can now click and go to notes screen. All right, I know I'm a little bit fast with this, but I know you guys already know about this. I've talked about it in the last classes, so it's not something I need to be explaining again. If you take the class seriously, if you study, right, the past classes, you're going to see all these things as less. So we are going to say here, please enter content, add content. So I'm just updating the text, right, and the title, and then the button to save to do. So this will just be add, this will just be no content. All right, so this works. So what I'm going to do here now, previously we were using to-do items, right? So I'm going to update this. Instead of being using to-do items, we're going to be using shared preference. We are going to be using shared preference for storing this. So let me talk a little bit about shared preference. Shared preference is used for storing small user data, and it's great for storing key value pairs. So when you have, it's just like similar with what we have like map and JSON structure, right? It says value based on key value pairs. So in order to access the value from the DB, the local the shared preference, we are going to use the key. So it's based on the key, it's going to return the value for you. So it's just similar with map, but it persists data, right? And with shared preference, you can use it to save list of string. You can use it to save Boolean value, integers, double, and strings. All right. And though it has some limitations, so it's not suitable for complex data like large model file, list, or maps. So you can just use this to store simple user data like user settings, authentication status, and other simple things. All right. So you're gonna get it. But for now, okay, I think what I'm going to do in this case here is to create, I'm going to use it to toggle light mode and dark mode. Okay. So yeah, that's the purpose of what I'm going to use the shared preference for. And in order to work with shared preference, we are going to go to pub.dev. I already introduced you to it in our last class where we included HTTP package. So you come to your pub.dev and you search for shared preferences, right? You see the first one, and you can see here it's officially a flutter.dev, right? They are the people that created this, the team that created this package, and it's Flutter favorite. So you can see when it was last updated 23 days ago. The current version is 2.5.2 as at when I'm creating this class. Okay, so we have it here. You can just click on it and you can see it's used for storing simple data, right? And data may be persisted to disk asynchronously, and there is no guarantee that writes, blah, blah, blah. So you can see, go read through it to clearly understand what the purpose of it. And you can see a simple example of how we can write data into shared preference. First, you create the shared preference instance, right? Then you use pref the set int to save an integer value, and you just have to specify the key. This is the key, this is the value. Set bool, the key, the value. Set decimal, the key, the value. Set string, key, value. Set string list, the key and the value. And to read data, you just have to call the key that you used to save that data, and it's going to return the value back to us. You can see it's just similar to our map. And you can use this to remove entry from shared preference, all right? So it's just simple, right? Nothing much. So just try to go through this documentation and you understand it better, all right? And try to pay attention and study. So our focus now is to go to installing. To install it, we just have to run this command in our Flutter application like this. All right, it's all installed now. This is okay, yeah, it's now installed. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to quickly, so I'm going to create a DB service that is going to handle everything DB related. Okay. So what I will do, I will come to where I have my weather service. So inside here, I'm going to create a new file called db service.dat. All right. Okay. So what I want to do now, we have our counter application. I want to use it as an example. We have this counter app, right? Remember, we're using shared preference to store, we are using our provider, right, in the last class. So if I increase this now, I go back, right? As long as the app is still available, you can see that the counter value is still showing the correct value, right? But notice that if I restart this app, the counter starts from 0. So I will show you guys how to persist a simple counter like that and show the values, right, to persist this data. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to create a class. I'll call this DB service. So the first thing you want to do is to create an instance of shared preference. So we just have to use final, create the name shared preference. Let me use shared pref for short. Then we have shared preferences dot get instance. All right. So this is it. Then I'm going to create two methods. So the first method is going to be to let's say the first method is going to be save counter value, right? Save counter. Then I'm going to pass since it's going to be a parameter, I'm going to pass the counter value here. And what I'm going to do here first is to create, I'm just going to call, I'll make this asynchronous because this shared preference is a feature. So we need to use a sync keyword in order to access it. So what I'm going to do here is to say await shared pref dot, no, I think that won't work. So first I will create an initial like a counter instance again, like a variable to just hold the shared pref instance. So what I will do, I'll just call this pref, right? And I will say await shared pref. Okay. So from here now I can now do pref.setInt. So what this does is going to save this value for us into our local storage. Okay, setInt counter is the key. If you hover on it, you will notice that it has string key and string int value. So we use setInt to save the counter. So you might be asking now, what about I want to save integers? It's very simple. You can use .setInt, whatever you want to save string, set string, right? It takes a value of string, right? It takes a value of string right there. So this integer is not going to work. That means we need to update this to be an integer, like a string, okay? So it has a lot of values, a lot of properties that you can work with. You have await pref dot set double set string list. It takes a list of string, set bool, but just make sure the key is unique for every new value that you want to save. Okay, then you have dot get to get the particular items that you want. So we're going to get back to that later. And we have dot clear. This clear, what it does, it clears the app every shared preference value from the storage. It clears the storage, right, completely. Then you have something called remove. So this remove only removes one item. Like you can say remove, then you specify the key, which is counter. This is not going to clear the database. It's only going to remove this counter value instance of it from the database. All right. So this is it. This one now handles saving of counter value. So we're going to write another logic to get counter value, just like this. So what it does, since we are expecting an integer to be returned from this counter value, we use an int as the return data type. Then we have get counter value, right? So from here, I'm also going to do the same thing I did here, creating a variable to hold the instance, right, that I created initially. Then I will now return it, pref.getInt counter. So this counter might return null. That's if we are trying to access it for the first time when user have not created any count at all. It's going to return null. So we're going to handle that case. If it's null, then return 0 as the default value. Okay. So I believe that answers your question concerning fetching and getting. So if you also want to get a string, you can use the same thing, get string, and make sure the name is unique as well. So you cannot use the same name for the same key for different values. If you want to do something like get int again, let's say get another int, maybe you want to get the age of the person, make sure the key also it's unique, right? And if you want to access it, make sure you use the actual key that you specified here already. So that's it for the DB to save counter value and to get counter value. So now let's go back to our counter app, and I'm going to show you guys how we can persist this data. So here is our counter screen, right? And I will not be doing all these things inside our UI because I want to keep it clean. Remember, we already created a provider, counter provider that handles those stuff for us. So inside this our counter provider, what I'm going to do is to, what I'm going to do here is to call init counter, like init counter initially, like to get the initial counter value. All right. So what I'm going to do, first thing, let me create an instance of the DB service equal to DB service, right? I'm initializing it. So if you go back to our class where we talked about class in that, you will notice that I initialize our DB service, all right? So we need to initialize this DB service before we can use it, right? We need to be able to use it. I created an instance of it here. So what I'm going to do now is just to call, I'll call final new count, like initial counter, like the initial value of the counter that we already have stored in our DB. So I'll use db.service.get counter value, right? So this is going to return a future of int. So let me use a string here, right? It's going to return an integer. So I will now set that integer to our counter. It's very simple. I'll just do counter dot initial counter and then call notify listener. So what this happens is that whenever we get to this screen, it's going to check if the DB has a counter value and then assign it to this counter, right? That's what the initial value would be. So to get this working, I'm going to go to our counter screen right here. And inside here now, what I'm going to do is just to call, I'll come to my init state, right? I'll say init state. And inside here, I'm going to do context.read. I'll call my counter provider dot get thing, init counter, right? So this will be the first thing that is going to call whenever user comes to the screen. We need to initialize the counter to get the value. All right. So this is pretty much it. And now if you notice, if I go back and come in, nothing really happens. Okay, this is showing me an error on handle exception, missing plugin exception. So this happens most times when you add a new plugin in your Flutter project. So when you add a new plugin, it's advised that you kill the app completely first, and then try to rerun it again. All right, you have to rerun the app again. Then once it's done, we can now retest the logic or again. So let me just give it some few seconds to run, and then we'll get back to it. All right, so now there is no error, everything works fine. Okay, so now you can see that. Let me try to print out something here so you guys can see the initial value, initial counter, like so. So if I click on counter app, you see the initial counter is 0, right? So nothing actually. So now what I'm going to do is whenever user increments or decrements counter, I'm going to save the counter value, right? So this is what I'm going to do. On increment, I'm going to do db service dot save counter value, right? This is going to save the counter value for us. And also we can do the same thing when user decrements the value. We can save, or right? You can save the value, or to make it better, you can just create a simple method that calls save counter, like so. So what this does is it's just going to save. We created a method, right? So what this is going to do is just going to save counter value. So we can also call it here and save counter value, like so. So this is what happens now. If I increase it, right, it has saved it. So let me do a hot restart, and I'm trying to restart the app now. Okay, let's go to counter app. You can see the value. Okay, this one did not change because we did not initialize the provider that is handling it. But if you notice now, when we come back to counter app, you will notice that we have the value as what it was before we restarted the app. If I decrement it as well and try to close the app, if I go back to the counter app, you will see it's still retaining the initial state, just like that. Currently is 11. Let me do a hot restart and go back to counter app. You can see it's persisting the state for us, right? So this is one example of how you can use shared preference in your app, right? There are so many others that you can explore, right? If you go to the readme, we are going to see how to work with get bool, get string. It's just similar thing of what I've showed you right now. It's just the same thing. There is no it's just the same thing. Okay, so yeah, go ahead and experiment with it and see how it works. And let me give you guys another example. We're going to be doing that example with our to-do application. Okay, no, let me go with our note app, right? This note app now. Remember, we are already using a list for this. So I want to show you guys how to persist or create a note app using shared preference. So here, let's go to our notes application. This is our scroll level screen, no, note screen, right? Currently we are using to do item. So let me show you guys how we can use how we can use lists to save this data. This is already using ephemeral state. There is no provider handling everything. So I'll just stick with it so you guys can get a clearer understanding. All right. First thing I'm going to do, I will still work with our DB service, right? So this DB service, let me just add a comment, note saving with shared preference. All right. So inside here, remember this our list now is a list of string. So that means we'll be using this pattern, set string list, to save our data. So we just similar thing with what we already have here, save counter value and get counter value. So I will just duplicate this, okay? But I will change the name to save notes, right? And this is going to be a list of string, right? Which is the note value. And this is going to be get notes, okay? Then the key is not going to be counter, it's going to be notes, right? That's going to be the key that is going to be using to access and also get it. So I will not be using get int here. I will not be using set int, I'll be using set string list. And the counter is going to be this value, right? Because this set list is accepting a list of string, okay? Then here I'm going to use get string list, and if it's null, I will just return an empty list. So this should be list of string, like so. Cool. Now we can see it's just simple. I just duplicated them and made it simple. So let's go back to our node screen. And now in our node screen, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here, right, in the init state now. The first thing I'm going to do is to fetch our node data. So I'll create an instance of the DB service, right? I'm going to create an instance of the DB service somewhere around here. So I'll say DB service equal to DB service like this. And inside our init state, what I'm going to call is DB service dot get note, right? Dot then, right? I'm using then. You can use await or you use then. So it returns the value. I know I've not showed you guys this, but if you have been practicing, you understand that there's something like this for futures. When you have a future method, you can either use await, but since we cannot use a sync, right, inside init state, I won't really advise you use a sync inside init state. So we can do something like this, db.getNote.then. When it's ready, then we can now get the value, right? The value that returns, and then we can now call to do items equal to the value, right? You can go ahead and call set state because this is ephemeral state, so we can just use set state to rebuild the widget, right? But I won't advise you use await and async inside init state. If you want to do that, like I said, the way that you already know, you can create a method get note like so, and here we can just create a new method which is get note, and then we can mark this to be a sync, and then we can say note await db service.getNote, right? So this works. Then we can now do something like to do items and assign it a new value of whatever is coming from the note. Then go ahead and call set state, right? So this should work for us. So now watch what happens. If I go back and try to go back to the notes app, it returns nothing because this notes app is currently empty. There's no value in it. So now we are going to create a new method to save the notes once user saves. So this is very simple. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to come here where we have delete to do. Immediately the user deletes the to do, I'm going to call db service dot save note, and then I will just pass in the to do item, right? Because at that point, users already updated the to do, and I'll just call db service dot save item. I will do the same thing for when users click on add to do, right? I'm also going to save the to do also into the list. So watch what happens here. I will go back to the Notes app and click a content. Let me just type something and click on add. You can see now it has been added. If I do a hot restart on this, you will notice that our data will still be persisted, right? The data is still there. So I can add multiple items as well. And you can see as I'm adding, if I go back, the data are still there. I can delete the actual one I want. If I restart the app, the data is still persisting. So that's the fun thing you can do with shared preference, right? You can use it to store key value pairs, but I wouldn't advise you use it for large data, right? So this one summarizes everything about shared preference for this class. So next, let's talk about SQLite and Hive. I'll just show you guys Hive. If you want to work with Hive, you will go here. Let's say stay on search for Hive. I think that should be Hive Flutter. There are so many packages. We have Hive Flutter. This was 3 years ago. We have Hive 2 years ago. So this one have 1.2 million downloads and likes. So you can work with this. It's going to give you what you want, right? So that's pretty much it. And for Hive, okay, so Hive is just, let me show you guys the example. You just first you create a Hive box, your box.put, you can see the key and the value. Then you can get it using the key, just similar with shared preference. Okay, so guys, make sure you practice how to use Hive. So Hive is a NoSQL fast key value database. It's better for caching and unstructured data, just like shared preference as well. Okay, so now the main thing is SQLite. SQLite is SQL based, is a relational database, and is ideal for structured data. When you need to store structured or large amounts of data, you will need a local database like SQLite. Okay, that's if you're not using database and online database like Firebase, Superbase, or Amplify, right? Or dedicated API server. So you can just work with your SQLite to persist data locally. Okay, so I'm going to talk about SQLite as the last thing, but before I proceed, let me give you an example when to use each storage option. Okay, when to use each storage option. You can use your shared preference for small settings and user preferences. I already talked about this. SQLite is when you need relational database and queries and you want them to be structured, especially for large data. So use Hive for fast NoSQL based key value storage. I think SQLite is more, and shared preference is more like the alternative for Hive. So you can just toggle between both of them, which one you want to use for your project. All right, so here now we are in the last part. I'm going to show you guys how we can build a simple to-do app using SQLite. So first thing you want to do is to go to your pub.dev and search for SQLite because it's actually a package as well. SQFlite, right? Flutter plugin for SQLite is self-contained, high reliability, embedded SQL database engine. So you can see this is also Flutter favorite. So we'll be working with this. 21 days ago, that was when it was last updated. So what I'm going to do, you can go to the examples as well. You can see that first, I know this is going to be a little bit complex, but I'm going to help you guys to understand it better. And once you watch this video multiple times, you will definitely understand how to use SQLite. All right, so this is the demo code to perform raw SQL queries. You have first to get a location using get database path. We create the database name, right? This is how you delete database, right? Database, you open the database, insert some record into the database, update database, get database, right? So what we are going to be doing in this example is to create data value, like to add record into the database, delete record from the database, and also to get records from the database. So join me, guys. Let's go. So I think for this, I will still be using the ephemeral state, right? I will not be using provider to manage states. because I want to keep things simple and straightforward so you guys can understand. So from here, we have delete to do, right? We have get note. No, this should be delete note. Let me update it. Right? So delete. Okay, so I will still be working with our DB service. You know, we have already created an instance of shared preference on service. So I will just write a comment here that says SQLite service. Oh, I think I've not added the SQLite. So sorry guys. Let me go back here and Flutter pub add. So for this, we also need to kill the app and rerun it again because SQLite is also a plugin and is available for Android, iOS, and macOS. So once you have done that, you can now rerun the app again. You don't need any additional configuration. Just adding the plugin is okay, is enough. So what I'm going to do first, while this is building, I'm going to create different methods that is going to handle creating the database, and we'll set up the SQLite database, right, and create the logic, the different methods that are going to save the data into the database. So the first thing I'm going to do here is, though it's been a long time, but let's see. All right, let's look at your example here. All right, so I'm going to create a database instance here, and I'll call this database. You can see it's coming from SQLite, right? Database, database equal to, let's say, database. All right, I think this is, okay, we cannot initialize this directly. So what I'm going to do here, okay, it's very simple. I'll do this. Let's create a future method, right? And I will call this, it's going to return database for us. So we say init database. So first we need to initialize the database instance where we are going to create the nodes name and the different tables that will be available for the nodes. So this has already given me an option, right? So in this our node, the only table that we need to create here is the ID and the content, right? So as you can see here, we have DB await, we call open database, is available on SQLite. Then we have the name, which is nodes.db. Then you specify the version to be 1. Then on create returns two things, DB and the version. So you just use a async here, right? What we can now do here is to return, we can now await db.execute. So what we are doing here is to execute this method in order to create a new table. So I know this is going to be a little bit complex, but if you're coming from SQL background, it's going to be easier for you. So just make sure you rewatch this video and you're going to understand how to work with it. So we have create table if not exist, right? If it doesn't exist, then create the table nodes, right? ID, integer, primary key, auto increment. So this ID is one of the column we are going to have in the database. Remember, normally you need an ID to identify the table, okay? Then we have nodes. This node is just about the content, okay? Test, not null. So the test cannot be null. That means anything null will not be allowed into the database, okay? This is just a string to just, make it, because this execute accepts a string, right? So that's it. Then we are now going to return the database, okay? So the next thing we are going to do, this is the first thing you should do, right? So the first thing we are going to do now is to add notes into the database. So it's just simple. To add notes, we're just going to call the string note, which is this value, and we'll call final DB, just similar to SQLite, right? To shared preference. So we have final DB await init database. So we're going to call this database to get the database object. Then from the database, we can now call db.insert, then notes, right? Which is the name. We are going to insert notes and the key and the value. You can see insert is also taking a map, key and value, string table, which is the table you want to. You can also set other things too, which is conflict algorithm. Okay, so this is it for adding to do. Then we have another one which will be for getting to do. And since this is returning a list of string for us, we'll have get all nodes, right? So inside this get all nodes, what we are doing here is very simple. We have the DB first. We are going to create the instance of the database. Await init DB. Then we say nodes, await db.query. Then we pass the nodes. Then the column that we actually want to get. It's not really necessary to set this column. So we're going to remove this. So we have db.query nodes. So we are calling the key, which is the column name, right, to access this, the record name. Nodes is going to return all the nodes for us. Then here, what we are going to do now is just to say notes, because this is a list, is already returning a list for us. This notes is already a list of map string objects. Okay. So this should be map string, list of map string, let's just say dynamic, right? It should work. I think something is wrong. Map string dynamic. So yeah, I will just need to return notes. Cool. You can see that once we fetch the data, I'm returning the data back to SQLite for us. So we have the last one, which is to delete the to-do, to delete note from the to-do. So it's very simple. First is the integer, which is the ID, because when we are fetching this, it's going to return the ID for us. So we need the ID of the to-do, the ID that will be gotten from this. And then final DB, we need to initialize the database again to get the database object. Then from there, we can say db.delete notes where ID, right? Based on the ID, that's what we want to delete. And argument, no, this should be where arguments. Yeah, this is where ID, based on the ID. All right, we are going to delete the data from the database. So this is pretty much all we need. Get all nodes, delete nodes, and add nodes. So for update nodes, I want you guys to go and do your research on that. That's to show that you're actually learning and following what we are doing. But it's just similar, right? This is for updating nodes. So I just gave you an example. So try to create an edit button somewhere to update nodes based on the ID, right? And then you pass the string, okay? But I'm not going to be showing you guys that one. So let's go to our node screen. So right now, instead of using our shared preference, I'm going to come here and db service dot get all nodes, right? This is coming from SQLite, right? Get all nodes. Yeah, get all nodes. And inside here, to do items is no longer going to be a list of string, but rather it's going to be a list of map string. The reason why it's a map of string is because it's going to return the content, and also it's going to return you're going to return the nodes, right? And also return the ID as a map of string. So let's go back here. This to do item, now we're going to update it to be a map of string. Let's just say dynamic because we don't know what the value is going to be. Okay, so that should work. Then saving to do, this should be to delete to do. Now we can just call delete nodes. Then we pass in the ID. So this index should actually work for ID. I think we are going to update this delete later. Let me just comment that one out because that method is not really correct because we have changed it to list of map. So here we have our to do items dots add. So we are going to create our own ID for this. So we have note, right? And we have ID. So the ID, will just use a random number to generate ID. So let's use final round. So this is just like generating random number using the math method in that. So we can use random number to give us the ID dot next int, which is going to be at least max of 20. Okay, so this random int is going to give us random integers, random numbers. All right. So dv service dot, this should be save note, right? Let me see. Save notes. No, it shouldn't be save notes. This should be add note, right? Add note. Add note that takes a string. Okay. Add note shouldn't take a string. I think by default, SQLite handles the ID for us. Yeah, it handles the ID on its own. So for add note, what we are just going to do here is, yeah, we don't need this to do items. If you ask me, we don't need to add anything directly into to do items. We just need to call this add note, and then we call the controller.test and remove any value that is empty. .3. Cool. So this should handle dbService.add node for us. So immediately we add a new node. What we can do is just to maybe write a function. Once we add nodes, we can just get node again, right? So once we add node, we are going to call fetch. We're going to fetch get node. So this get node is going to get all the nodes and then update the UIV time for us, because we are not using to do items in this case. So we're just going to call get nodes, get all nodes, and then assign it to the to do items. Cool. So now let's proceed to something else. So our to-do items now is, they say it cannot be a string. So for this, we access index and the note, like so. List string is not a subtype of, okay? Let's just do a hot restart to get that out of the way. And go back to note app, right? So I'm going to try to add a new note now to be sure that it's going to save and also display. All right, so it just saved, but for some reason, I'm not seeing any data. All right, so I'm not seeing any data, but it was saved. So I need to look at the key that I used here. Let's check our service, DB service, notes, this is notes, yeah, notes. So why are we not getting any data? So one example to know is to try and print out what we are getting from the notes. So I won't do it here. Let me just go back to our note screen. So whenever we call get notes, I'm going to print this out and say note. So this is part of debugging to know where the actual problem is coming from. So our note is empty, which shouldn't be the case, but we have an ID here. Okay, we have an ID here, but note happens to be empty. So I think we are doing something wrong. Add nodes, controller.test. Oh, my bad. You can see here we were already clearing the controller before saving it. So this is where the problem is coming from. We are supposed to save it first, right, before deleting or clearing it. So let's try that again. I know we are going to have two items now. Cool. You can see that. So we can add another one. Cool. You can see that immediately we added a new to do, we clear the controller, and then we call get note, and this get note gets the note from us. You can see how the items are in the database, right? So you can use this to store large amount of data. and it's not going to give you any problem. I know this is currently empty, so I'm going to look for a way. Let's write a logic to delete this item. So from this note, if you notice, I want to add a tab to this list style. When we say on tab, okay, not on tab actually, let's do this inside here. When you delete item and click on tab, we want to print out the ID. So we can get that using, you can see the ID here, list of map, ID note, ID note, ID note. All right. So we have to do items index dot ID. You can do this in the short form by using note, something like this, so that we don't have to be repeating ourselves. So this should just be note like so. So if I click on it, you see that the ID is 1. If I click, the ID is 2. It's giving us the ID. So it's based on this ID now that we are going to call delete to do. So what I'm just going to pass is this particular ID. Instead of the index, I'm going to pass the ID. Then we go to delete note logic. So inside here, I'm going to call dbService.delete note, and then I'll pass the index. I think I should change this to ID for better naming. So once that has been done, I'm now going to call get note. Simple. So get note, you're now going to update it for us. We don't need this anymore. All right. So now I'm going to go back. You can see the data is still persisting. I will click this. You can see it has been deleted. Currently, we just have 2 items, deleted and delete, just like that. So you can see the fun it is, how fun it is working with SQLite and also shared preference. I know where you have issues is when you're trying to create this database. But just study this, is going to give you an idea of how to update, delete, get all nodes. Okay, let me just help you guys to update to do. So let's go to our node screen. In our data here, where we have trailing, okay. So what I'm just going to keep it simple, where you type the text, and when you click on update, it's going to take the text based on the ID. It's going to update the string for us. That's the logic I want to take now. So here I will duplicate this guy. This is going to be leading. So we have our leading icon. So this icon is going to be update, like so, or let's just say, yeah, update. So what happens here is, first I will just use the same approach I'm using to save to do. I will use it here whenever we click on this item, right? I'm going to check if this validator, right, this string is valid. Then what I'm going to do is to call db.update note, right? The update note takes the ID, which is going to be note ID, and then the value, right? Then we can clear it, set state. I think we don't really need this set state or whatever that I'm calling here. Yeah, we don't need this set state in any way. We don't need that. So we just get notes, and get notes is going to handle it for us. So watch what happens. I'm going to go back to our note and type in something. Once, if I type, nothing happens because it's currently empty. So I'm validating it. So that means I want to change this test to destiny, like so. And if I click on add, it's going to add a new one, right? But if I click on update, it's going to update this value. You can see that it has updated it. So let me add something else, add new item, and let me try to update this one now. I will say with this value, you just click on it, it's going to update it. And you can also delete it, guys. So this is pretty much everything that I wanted you guys to know about persisting data using shared preference, and also uh, using SQLite. All right. So far, we have been able to talk about storing notes in SQLite and shared preference. We displayed save notes when the app reopens, and we also allowed users to delete and update notes. So guys, this is everything for today's class. So if you have any question, don't forget to compile them for Saturday weekend, which we are going to be having a Q&A section. So guys, thank you so much for being part of today's class. I will see you all in the next class.